Hey guys, welcome back to another video with the 2 Plus podcast. This has been a video I've been kicking around for a while because when I started my Warhammer the Old World journey, I immediately got back into the Lizard Man. Little did I know that they would turn out to be the weakest, or if not one of the weakest armies in the game. And I've been left with this beautifully painted army that's sitting on my shelf, becoming less and less competitive as the years go by, or as the months go by, I should probably say. Since then, or I guess in the beginning, I very quickly got a unit of Croxagors, especially those brand new sculpts that you can see on the bottom right that are part of the Age of Sigmar range, and even played them at a tournament where they didn't do so badly because to begin this format, everybody was experimenting with things and move six and looking imposing were probably enough to get the job done. However, since then, you can see that it's been a very difficult trot for monstrous infantry, and it hasn't just been the Kroxigor who were consigned ever more so to the dustbin of whatever Games Workshop does with its discarded intellectual property, but it's very hard to make the argument that any monstrous infantry out there are relevant in the game at the moment. You have armies of infamy, like the Minotaur Blood Herd, that are not very good at all. You have the bad light ogre bulls that any army can take with as mercenaries, and apart from the rule of cool, don't get across the line. But I'm here today to talk to you about why it is that monstrous infantry is not very good to the point of being unplayable, and why they are the worst unit type in the game, and it's not even close. So the first reason I came up with was that really, you're paying for elite costs for core problems. So these units are too expensive to become tar pits like the Marauders that I talked about earlier in the week, and they're too fragile as hammers. They can't take a hit, and frankly, they just don't hit hard enough. So what is their role? One of the more difficult things if you're trying to play competitively, or at least play well, which is what we do in this game, and Paddy and I are finding more and more that weak units are not only useless, but they sit around and sort of clog up and make the game even more unenjoyable because they can't do anything, even with initiative. And Monstrous Infantry is starting to fit that bill. One of the reasons that is because you have core units, you have your special and rare, and you have your characters, and those things are pretty stratified in the game in the sense that for a lot of armies, especially the elf type armies or those armies that are waning in strength, like a lot of the legacy armies, really you rely on those characters to be your hammers. Then your special and rare, which are somewhat interchangeable, and Games Workshop really needs to look at this in terms of useless bloat in their rules, where being rare or special doesn't seem to matter too much for the way points are spent because competitively people are maxing out on characters for the most part. It feels like that you're going to get these core unit, or that's where you're going to provide some differentiation. So different armies get a bit of flavor from their special rare, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of distinction where, say, Pegasus Knights are special for some reason, and other units that are rare, like Grey Eagles in High Elves or Wood Elves, are pretty useless in that slot. So what it means is that the core units really are where you're going to find the weaknesses of particular armies, and a lot of people online would argue that what you can do with your core points determines how competitive your army is going to be. So vampire counts get the ludicrousness that is Graveguard on top of the other things that they have and the synergies that the Graveguard benefit from there, and Cathay on top of that are looking at just hyper efficient core with ambushing and different upgrades and undercosted units. And even if you wanted to argue for Tomb Kings, the better builds tend to take Ushabti in core and special. So where we're coming from here is that typically when you buy a special rare unit, it's going to have to pull its weight. It's going to have to win the game for you because those characters might be a wash, and how players use their special or rare points is going to determine some of the strategic matchup, and then how core units are going to be mined for their points, if at all, on the other side. In this case, you've got monstrous infantry who are very rarely core. I'd love to make the argument why they should be core more often, especially for some armies, but they tend to have those sorts of problems. They don't really do enough that you're almost trying to protect them in a game, as some of the other points I make will come across as. And I think in this sense that you're looking at monstrous infantry as what role do they fill even in the era post 1.5? Can they hold space? Not really. Are they fast enough for tempo? Probably not. Do they hit hard enough to gain their points back? Not at all. It's very difficult to know what they do at this moment, and I will go into that in a little bit more detail in the following slides. In the meantime, thank you to Jeff from Pandemwargaming. We want to shout out his very high quality plastic products. His terrain, especially, is what he leads with. But beyond that, you can also check out movement trays, bases, scenic bases, all things that you see us use from time to time on this video. And even overwhelmingly, if you've seen printed miniatures, they're from Jeff. We appreciate Jeff and what he does for the channel, and you can follow this link below and both of us win. Thank you very much. The second reason I've got is really that monstrous infantry don't benefit from being infantry, which is one of the great things that has jumped up since 1.5 came out. There's no static combat resolution, which is getting bigger and bigger with massed infantry and the press of battle, or the unit strength push towards unit strength 10. On top of that, Horde is starting to pop up a little bit more. That's not going to come through with your monstrous infantry. Beyond that, they can't hold objectives, which was something that the format was very big on. That your core units in some jurisdictions, people are just playing them so they can hold objectives. In Sydney, where the rules have been stratified a little bit more to make objective holding more powerful, you're still seeing infantry needing to take them, but monstrous infantry don't count. The awkwardness of their unit strength 3. A profile means that you only get to unit strength 9 with a unit of 3, which tends to be the default for a lot of them. Once you get to 4, you've got a guy in the second rank who's not doing a lot, who typically costs around 50 points. So that's a bit of a problem. Really, the idea of being infantry at all here is not beneficial to this subtype of units. It's the monstrous side that matters a bit more. You're paying roughly 50 points. Typically, that means you get 3 wounds. Typically, it means you get 3 attacks. Typically, it means you get low weapon skill. And typically, it unfortunately means you get low armor as well. So, in this case, infantry, just in terms of the numbers that it creates, is leading to strategy where you can bounce a dragon pretty easily with a basic unit of infantry that has the maximum amount of ranks it can take and a standard bearer. So really, without Horde, you're going to get to 5.5 pretty quickly. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on what comes in the front to be able to deal the full amount of overkill just to win combat by half against a musician, or by 1 if you have a musician. So there's a lot going on there, and I don't think that monstrous infantry really fits in here. Like the point of being infantry, why are they infantry? If you called them monsters, that would just be the same. The idea that they're infantry at all doesn't do a lot except restrict you in this game. And something that the designers are going to have to reckon with when they move to a new edition is what's the point of infantry at all? There seem to be more disadvantages than advantages because of the movement and that the flexibility you have if you have 360-degree movement, the extraordinary accuracy of ballistic skill shooting at the moment. And while they've made moves to dumb down magic, characters are still running around doing most of the killing. The third reason is on the corollary. They don't really benefit from being monstrous either, unfortunately. So, what monsters typically have are stomps, and stomps are better than high attacks because they hit automatically. That is an enormous gain in this game where the typically it's a lot to be able to hit on a 2 plus. To hit on a 3 plus means you're still going to miss a third of the time. It gives you great whiffing potential where you miss a series of attacks. And in this case, what you're seeing with monstrous cavalry and monsters is they tend to have a lot more stomps. Instead, I guess, monstrous infantry on occasion, and not always, get the less good impact hits, which don't provide armor piercing in most cases. And on top of that, need a 3-inch wind up, which is not only hard to pull off in itself, and a lot of rules jurisdictions don't give you that extra movement for doing things like closing the door, that I think is a little bit disingenuous, to be fair. But underneath that, They also don't give you, where a unit gives ground, you're not going to get those impact hits on following up, and where a unit just doesn't fall back in good order far enough, you're going to lose the impact hits again there. So, like chariots, it just means they're not that good, but unlike chariots or heavy chariots, you're not getting any armor piercing naturally for that sort of attack. On top of that, every man and his dog seems to have swift stride these days. So where you have highish movement, so things like trolls, ogres, Kroxigor, they do have movement six. I believe trolls do as well. So that should be an advantage. It is an advantage compared to other infantry, but it's not an advantage in the context of the game, where really the vast majority of troops that you're going to see at a competitive level either have flying, Swift Stride, or both. And those are enormous spikes. So six plus a reroll, even with our last video talking about Taskmaster's Scourge, even Dwarf Carts and other things are getting out there, Mortis engines to give plus movement bonuses. I do think debuffing movement is one of the underutilized effects in the game for highly skilled players, but you're not going to have to worry about that with monstrous infantry because highly skilled players don't take them at the moment, sadly. So, a good comparison is just to look at what monstrous cavalry get in contrast. And you're not going to find it hard to look at, well, Pegasus Knights and monstrous cavalry, demigryphs get a lot of play. Dragon Ogres were format defining for a long time, and despite what I said at the new edition, they are quite good still, especially as a wound sink. And you have to ask yourself, how did Monstrous Infantry not get any of these benefits on the flip side? It is a very stark comparison to make, and I think where therein is the secret. So if you would like to comment or reply down below about why you think the gap is so large between these very new subtypes to the game, I'd love to hear from you. Because if you haven't already, I think liking and subscribing is very helpful to us. If you can help us out, make sure you like the video. I've got James Alexander up. He's our most recent subscriber. But all of these guys, some who we know personally, some who we don't, are contributing to the channel on a financial basis each month, which helps Patty and I pay for the software that runs the channel and also encourages us to keep making these videos. So thank you guys very much. The fourth reason I had that Monstrous Infantry is the worst unit type in the game is that they really just fold to shooting in this ballistic skill meta. You may or may not believe me, and you may or may not think that it's never been worse than this with shooting, but with their low armor, their huge bases, and their toughness 4 in general, they are just sponges for shooting attacks. And sadly, they get riddled with bullets and get gunned down very easily. On top of that, their panic, often you've got 3 in a unit, or their threshold for panic is a lot lower. And as we'll see soon, their leadership is also pretty low by comparison. So, what we're starting to see in the last few releases, or at least at a more competitive setting, is this widespread small arms fire and accurate war machines. So, I think that the format is defined by the Sky Lantern at the moment, and that undead, while undead, are ludicrous and have design flaws that I've played and believe you're playing a much easier game of Warhammer competitively than other people. I do think it's the Sentinel, the Lantern that is holding down a lot of the other unit types like Pegasus Knights or any sort of massed infantry, which benefited from the recent rules changes from being relevant in the metagame. So unless your infantry can come back from the dead, you're just going to get obliterated by the low, I guess, shooting with very little modifiers. You can check out my video on the maths behind the Sky Lantern, but it's consistently able to delete units, and it's a big problem. Beneath that, the maths for any of the attacks that give you D3 plus 1 shooting, especially those at strength 4, AP1, AB1, like Null and Outriders, is pretty grim. Like, there's not a lot you can do. And Games Workshop needs to remember that just if you've got a handgun with that sort of attack, you're going to get sort of 3 activations before the cool models that you bought that only have a combat weapon get to do anything if they ever make it at all. And frankly, they're not making it across the table. Your beautiful unit of Dwarf Hammers shouldn't, it can die where it's standing, or it can move into the hail of fire like Australia's greatest war moment, Gallipoli, and die to a man, sadly, like we did. And that, while we celebrate that in this country for its bravery, it's not really a use of your time and money at this stage. So you're going to find the same thing with your monstrous infantry. It's going to walk across the board and just get smashed by machine gun fire and drop dead. And even when better units than that are being going that way, you're going to find the investment, the painting, and all the stuff you did to get these on the table to be a waste of time. So beyond that, if you're not being shot at by outriders or a lantern, there's still plenty of strength for high AP armor being one shooting around. And it just means that like you drop anything, you're sort of getting hit with the splash damage too of now the things that are there, like Doom Divers, fanatics that might be there to deal with things like the Lantern and have a pretty good success rate against them. You're going to find that they're not going to do well and they're just going to die to a man, and you're going to have lost 150 to 300 points overall. Lastly, the saddest part for me about the monstrous infantry is they just need babysitting. Like they're meant to be these intimidating monsters, but they come with so many downsides that you need to either invest in the general being nearby, or you've got to have units that support them. They can't operate independently. So fear and immune to psychology sometimes help, but in the main, they've got low leadership. And that creates a lot of problems because there are, I guess, one of the sneaky ways of getting advantage at the moment is to sort of look at leadership, from Wailing Dirge at the top, but people are like breaking units, which is in the main how you win games of Warhammer. If you have low leadership, there's going to be ways that you're going to be disadvantaged. And even if you're able to get into combat, the break test on a 9 plus, which is what most things are taking them on in this format, versus a 6 or a 7, is pretty grim. Because if you're taking one, you've lost by combat by at least one. And even if you lose by 3, you might think, oh, that's not a bad result. And suddenly you're rolling on a 4 or a 5. So panic and break tests are very real for these units because you play so few of them. When you lose one, you're risking triggering these break tests. If you have to fall back in good order, you're going to lose a lot of momentum and eradicate a lot of the reasons to bring them in the first place. If you lose 2, your low psychology is probably going to mean you're running from the blob. What babysitting means is you're really restricted in the tactical opportunities that you have with this unit. It means that you're not going to be able to flank very easily because those units will be able to be picked out on the side. Something like Ruby Ring, which is losing a lot of its relevance in the metagame, is still really good against a unit like this because if it can pick off a guy outside of the bubble of a leadership general protection, then it's going to trigger a panic, and the more chances you give your opponent to roll on leadership, the more likely you're going to see something unlucky happen. So, really, to finish on a positive note, because I can't think of good reasons to run these beautiful models, which is really sad, is the Ogre Death Star the only exception to this? Now, you might not play in an area where ogres are very prevalent. We have players in Sydney who play ogres, who've been trying to perfect ogres. You can head to the Old World Behemoths channel. I think for the next Sydney Oldhammer tournament, that ogres might be a pretty good pickup. We're playing 40% characters with some other restrictions on vampires and Cathay, and there tends to be a lot of magic missile attacks in Sydney, so maybe that Death Star is going to be good. But can you think of any other relevant examples in the metagame where monstrous infantry are even just a contributing force to a bigger picture? So while ogres, their whole army is monstrous infantry, and due to the flexibility of their characters, there is a somewhat viable competitive build. Are there any other builds out there? In making this video, I couldn't think of any, and that's dismaying to me. They are one of my favorite unit types. I want to see them come back, and I hope as we head towards this FAQ in January that there may be some small changes that help bring them back to relevance. Thanks again, guys. We'll see you soon on the channel. I will be back with another video later in the week, or Patty may have something in store for you soon. See you later.